To Tim Walz, who, just when you think no one's sitting at this table, neither she nor the big white blanket, can embarrass themselves any further, he does. She asks him, to her credit, about the carrying the weapons in war, which we know is a lie. He never served in war. He's been stealing valor for quite some time. And take a listen to this.
When there's a problem, you call a man. The Democrats can't even tell you what a man is.
So when you hear Walz brag about how much of a man he is, what does that tell you?
I think there might be a little bit of a cope there, you could say. There's a little bit, he has to remind us how masculine he is, trying to not even be able to load a shotgun or fix a...
Tim Walz may have banked on polished speeches and feel-good photo ops to carry his image. But Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk came wielding rhetorical wrecking balls. What unfolded wasn't your average critique. It was a political reckoning. With precision and fire, they spotlighted every fault line in his administration. Crumbling public schools, surging crime rates, and policies that promised progress but delivered disappointment. It was a full frontal expose that stripped away the PR gloss and revealed a governor more invested in media buzz than meaningful change. The facade cracked wide open, and suddenly the spotlight shifted from stagecraft to stark reality.
Carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about our children being shot.
I'll tell you one thing, the most masculine thing that someone can do in America today is stand up for women that are not able to stand up for themselves.
Right.
So while Tim Walz is going on Gavin Newsom's podcast, attacking me, by the way, saying that I'm a bad guy, well, I'm sorry, Governor Walz. One thing that we don't have in common is, unlike you in Minnesota, I, every single day, am actually fighting for female privacy in locker rooms and that women's sports will not have men in them. Real men stand up for women when they're not able to stand up.
Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk don't wait for invitations. They charge straight into the spotlight. No script, no safety net. When they spot dysfunction masquerading as leadership, they don't tiptoe or whisper behind the scenes. They bring the full force of the truth, cameras rolling and receipts in hand. So when Governor Tim Walz tried to spin failure into finesse, they didn't blink. They torched the illusion, turning his carefully crafted narrative into a roaring blaze of accountability. This wasn't about vendettas or headlines. It was about calling out the kind of loud, performative incompetence that practically dares someone to speak up, and they answered unapologetically.
The idea that you said that you were in war.
Yeah.
Did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my...
This is a sacred trust. In the spring of 2005, Walz walked away from that sacred trust, abandoning his post when he learned of an upcoming Iraq deployment. This is cynical Pubula saying this. He is a coward. According to this Twitter feed, he is a quitter. And every veteran I've talked to thinks that Walz is close to betraying the country.
Megyn Kelly didn't need a second look to spot the illusion. The political branding around Tim Walz was slick, too slick. He wore the everyman badge like a Halloween costume, posing as the folksy governor who just gets the everyday Minnesotan. But Megyn spent her career slicing through spin, and she's fluent in the language of manufactured authenticity. What she saw wasn't grit or grassroots. It was a performance polished by consultants and coded in borrowed sincerity. It didn't resonate, it reeked of rehearsal. Walz's act didn't whisper real, it shouted focus grouped fraud. And Megyn called it out for exactly what it was.
What Walz did is the moral equivalent of a mother dropping off her 5 preteen children at an orphanage in the dead of night so that she could run for Congress. Yes, it is that bad. This was more than just abandoning troops. It also reflects a major personal deficit in his character and makeup. By the way, this is written by...
She began dismantling the polished facade, layer by layer, exposing the jarring disconnect between Governor Tim Walz's public image and his actual governance. Here was a man who promised unity and transparency on the campaign trail, yet delivered confusion and calculated avoidance once in office. Megyn Kelly didn't just point out the hypocrisy, she highlighted it with surgical precision. Walz, she noted, shifted blame with the skill of a child caught red-handed, insisting the spilled milk was somehow the cup's fault. His leadership blueprint seemed to follow a familiar script. Announce a vague, feel-good plan, sidestep any real accountability, then hold a press conference so opaque it raised more questions than it answered. Charlie Kirk, meanwhile, didn't waste time with surface-level critiques. He went straight for the economic jugular. He torched Walz's fiscal track record like it was made of flash paper. Charlie mocked the governor's uncanny ability to repel businesses from Minnesota faster than a January blizzard. Taxes soared, red tape tangled every corner of private enterprise, and economic momentum stalled like a rusted-out truck in a snowdrift. According to Charlie, Walz seemed to define prosperity as expanding government payrolls while hammering the private sector for being too productive. Then the picture widened. Together, Megyn and Charlie turned their focus to the governor's pandemic policies, what Megyn described as a case study in selective science. She skewered Walz for playing amateur epidemiologist, pushing sweeping lockdowns with a side of political bias. Small businesses were suffocated under harsh restrictions while big box stores stayed wide open. Public schools shuttered while bars received mysterious capacity waivers. It wasn't about public health, she argued, it was theater. A drama of control wrapped in a lab coat, with fear as its leading act.
The idea that you said that you were in war.
Yeah.
Did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack.
Charlie poured fuel on the growing fire, with receipts in hand. He laid out how Governor Tim Walz didn't follow the data, he cherry-picked it. One week, numbers were paraded in front of cameras as proof of control. The next, those same stats quietly vanished when they didn't support the narrative. Hospital capacity warnings were exaggerated, projections missed the mark by a mile, and policies seemed designed more to manage headlines than protect the public. Charlie called it exactly what it was: panic management posing as leadership. Instead of steadying the public, Walz stoked fear. And when it came time to lead, he froze, caught in the political headlights, unable to act decisively. But it wasn't just about bad policy. Megyn zeroed in on the performance. She pointed out how Walz always seemed to appear at the perfect photo op. Whether it was vaccine rollouts, protest vigils, or press briefings, there he was. Sleeve rolled up, brows furrowed, striking a pose like the star of a political documentary titled The Burden of Leadership. Yet when the flashbulbs dimmed and the fallout began, when small businesses collapsed, students slipped behind, and city blocks smoldered, he vanished. No press, no presence. Just silence, wrapped in a campaign strategy. Charlie didn't let the riots off the hook either. He pulled out the timeline and receipts, showing how Walz let the George Floyd protests spiral into violent chaos. Cities burned, law enforcement was overwhelmed, and the National Guard wasn't called in until the damage was already done.
Tim Walz then lied about it to run for Congress and acted as if he was on the front lines. And people in Walz's battalion died. People under his supervision died. If Master Sergeant retired Walz could not be trusted to fulfill his duties he had to his soldiers, his unit, and his nation in 2005, how can he be trusted to be vice president in 2000?
Charlie Kirk didn't buy the excuse that Governor Tim Walz was waiting for more information. He called it what it was: stalling, not strategy. He mocked the idea that Walz was carefully calculating next steps when, In reality, it looked more like he was waiting for someone else to clean up the chaos, so he could swoop in later and claim the credit. The hesitation, the silence, the let-it-burn posture, it all pointed to a leader more terrified of political consequences than actual destruction. Then the spotlight turned to education, and Megyn Kelly didn't hold back. With the sharpness of someone who's seen the damage firsthand, she unpacked Walz's record on Minnesota schools. A former teacher himself, Walz oversaw one of the steepest academic declines in recent state history. Reading scores plunged, math scores collapsed, and instead of bold action, he doubled down on virtual learning and vague promises, leaving students and parents to navigate the wreckage alone. From there, the discussion turned cultural. Megyn highlighted how Walz seems determined to walk a tightrope on every hot-button issue, never landing, never leading. He's the political version of lukewarm soup, trying so hard not to offend that he fails to inspire. Whether it's crime, gender policy, or race relations, he plays both sides, ultimately satisfying neither. Megyn accused him of enabling fringe agendas while pretending to be the calm voice of reason. His version of moderation, she argued, isn't principled, it's a mask. One stitched together with consultants, coded in cliches, and delivered with a Minnesota nice accent to soften the edge.
What kind of bullshit is that? No, you don't, sir. We don't lie about military service we didn't actually perform, like going to war. We don't steal valor by saying that we had a higher rank in the National Guard than we did. We don't run around saying we served in operating Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan when we didn't. We don't stand and watch somebody say that we were in combat in Iraq when we...
Charlie didn't pull punches, he launched them with precision. His critique zeroed in on what he called Tin Walz's unwavering loyalty to the political machine, portraying the governor less as a leader and more as a middleman for the party's agenda. Walz doesn't lead Minnesota, Charlie quipped. He answers to donors, to consultants, to whatever shiny new progressive trend flashes across the Twitterverse. The examples came fast and sharp. When party operatives said, "Mask the kids," Walz obliged, no debate, no nuance, no questions asked. When they said, "Close down churches, but keep liquor stores open," he nodded and complied. And when they pushed the line that rising crime was just a right-wing exaggeration, Charlie said Walz played along. Like a bobblehead caught in a hurricane, he added, driving the point home with both humor and disdain. Charlie's message was blunt. Walz wasn't governing, he was managing the optics of the Democratic brand, just another regional rep in snow boots parroting bullet points. Then Megyn stepped in, shifting the spotlight to public safety, where the criticism grew even sharper. She detailed how, under Walz's watch, law enforcement had been vilified, defunded, and left to operate with morale scraping the floor. Crime rates spiked, communities suffered, and people were left wondering why protecting neighborhoods had somehow become politically controversial. With officer resignation stats and testimony from weary residents, Megyn connected the dots between soft-on-crime rhetoric and the very real fallout on the ground. Walz didn't just fail to stop the breakdown, she said. He helped script the performance that led us here. Together, their takedown wasn't a rant, it was a dissection, focused, relentless, and chillingly calm. They didn't yell. They didn't need to. It was the stillness in their delivery that made it hit harder. It wasn't noise. It was impact.
Attacking me, by the way, saying that I'm a bad guy. Well, I'm sorry, Governor Walz. One thing that we don't have in common is, unlike you in Minnesota, I, every single day, am actually fighting for female privacy in locker rooms and that women's sports will not have men in them. Real.
They tore through the spin like a hot knife through butter. The talking points, stripped bare. The excuses, dismantled piece by piece. The flimsy narratives that had been carefully constructed over months of political theater, mocked into dust. What remained wasn't a statesman, it was a silhouette of a man who talked like a titan, acted like a temp, and governed as if he were constantly waiting for permission. Walz didn't lead, they argued, he followed the mood of the room, never the needs of the people in it. Megyn made it clear, The spotlight wasn't going anywhere. She vowed to keep it burning on leadership that postures in front of cameras, but disappears when accountability knocks. Charlie, meanwhile, promised to keep digging through numbers, contradictions, and the dizzying contortions of political doublespeak that masquerade as strategy. Walz may keep grinning through press conferences, but the illusion, they said, is shattered. The curtain has been pulled, and what's behind it isn't courage. It's choreography. Next, they turned to Ms. Climate Agenda, a glossy, poll-tested monologue that played well on cable news but crumbled under scrutiny. Megyn called it what it was, a PR campaign in disguise. While Walz was busy pitching windmills and solar dreams, Minnesota roads were collapsing, and residents were shivering in underheated homes. Left cold by fragile energy grids and frozen out foresight.
That clarification. And then here's two pieces of this that are really... I speak like they do. People are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves. And I speak especially passionately about, and then he goes on to blame it on the school shootings. I guess he was upset about school shootings, so he lied. But stop saying you speak like we do. I speak like regular.
Charlie zeroed in on the budget like a veteran math teacher, weary of watching the same mistakes repeat year after year. He broke down the numbers with surgical clarity, and the numbers didn't lie. Minnesota was pulling in record revenue from hardworking taxpayers. Yet when it came time to fix crumbling roads, underfunded schools, or strained emergency services, the state acted like it was flat broke. Charlie didn't hold back, ridiculing the state's reflexive addiction to raising taxes for progress, even as real progress remained MIA. Missing in action everywhere except photo ops and glossy campaign mailers. Megyn picked up the baton and turned the heat toward healthcare. Another marquee promise from Walz that fizzled on arrival. Reform was pledged, but what materialized was red tape, longer wait times, and rural hospitals gasping for resources. The only thing that expanded, she said, was the size of the committees tasked with solving the crisis, with no solutions in sight.
Continues for Tim Walz on the disastrous performance he delivered, in particular when it comes to his self-described knuckle-headed behavior, which was just his latest in a series of lies. The reason he resorted to, I'm a knucklehead, was he got confronted with his latest lie that's been unearthed. There's a long list of them. This one was that he was in China when the Tiananmen Square disaster unfolded, when hundreds of people were killed. You know, whether you were in a place where hundreds of people are being massacred by their...
Megyn didn't mince words. She said Minnesota's healthcare strategy was the only one in America capable of making people feel worse just by watching it in action. Doctors were burning out, patients were stuck in endless limbo, and the entire system spun like a hamster wheel. Motion without direction, effort without progress. Waiting rooms became holding pens. Treatment plans vanished into bureaucratic pipelines, and promises of reform. They dissolved into committee meetings and white papers no one ever read. Then Charlie shifted the focus to immigration, spotlighting what he called Walz's chronic vagueness. A stance coded in comforting language but empty of actionable policy. He pointed to sanctuary city slogans, symbolic gestures, and an open-door attitude that overlooked the practical toll on local communities already buckling under limited housing, jobs, and public services. The real-world impact was undeniable. The gap between what politicians in Street Paul envisioned and what everyday Minnesotans actually endured was no longer just a crack, it was a canyon.
If it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This took chutzpah. Let's go through it. You said you carried weapons in war, but you've never deployed in a war zone. A campaign official of yours said you misspoke. Did you? Well, I'm proud, incredibly proud of my record. He keeps doing this. Equally proud of my service in the classroom. Did I mention I was a teacher and a coach, an assistant coach? Okay, whatever. But he's more stolen valor. In the classroom, I'm in the classroom. My record speaks for itself. It doesn't actually. You've put a lot of lies into that record that you've been called out on by service.
Then they turned their attention to Walz's media playbook, and Megyn didn't hold back. She dismantled the strategy piece by piece, the hand-picked interviews, the flattering puff pieces, the calculated avoidance of real questions unless the cameras were soft, the lighting was perfect, and the script had been triple-checked by PR handlers. She'd seen politicians hide behind press agents before, but Walz, she said, had elevated it into a kind of performance art. His idea of transparency, she quipped, is letting the press watch him recite a statement written by 6 advisors he couldn't pick out of a lineup. Charlie jumped in, nodding. He treats media appearances like a college group project, shows up at the last minute, reads the final paragraph, and walks away expecting an A. But while the image was polished, the reality behind it was unraveling. Teachers were burning out. Small business owners were shutting their doors.
Disgusting, repulsive, and reprehensible examples of abandoning one's unit, of turning back on country and instead for own personal comfort and safety that we have ever seen in politics. And it's far worse than I even think people are describing it. It is worse than stolen valor. It is abandoning your fellow.
Parents pulled their kids out of public schools in record numbers, voting with their feet when their voices weren't heard. And what did Governor Walz do in response? He hosted a roundtable with a handful of like-minded insiders, then declared it progress, as if conversation alone could replace action. Megyn didn't hold back. She took aim at what she called the culture of complacency that had taken root under Walz's watch. Mediocrity wasn't just tolerated, it was rebranded as policy. Clear failures were spun into transitional phases, and every fresh crisis was followed by a tightly managed press release, deflecting blame onto the system instead of those steering it. She made it clear, this wasn't about political ideology, it was about presence. About leadership that vanishes when the stakes rise. Charlie agreed. Because at the core, it wasn't red versus blue, it was performance versus excuse. And under Walz, performance had flatlined. Optimism had been replaced with spin. And leadership? It had been carefully wrapped in buzzwords, applause, and just enough empathy to avoid accountability.